We are on, for those of you who are counting correctly, week 13 of the Gospel of John. So we're moving through a little quicker because, really, honestly, this one here, John 9, there's 3 sermons here, but I'm going to pack them all into one sermon. This is a buy one get two free sermon day. Calling today's sermon Blindspot. You'll see why in a minute, but. This is where he heals a blind man. This isn't the only time he heals a blind man, but this one, they really break down. John gives us a lot of information. And I'm going to give you a spoiler alert. This is a very fascinating story because in this story, there's a blind man, and he's the only one who sees. This is John for you. John likes irony like that. So, but this isn't really about a healing story. It's a story about sight, spiritual and physical. Again, spoiler alert, who has it, who loses it, what it costs. But the question is that John 9 is begging, or here is, what are you looking at that is preventing you from seeing? Okay, so now how's that for a intro? Before I go there, though, I have to tell you, I've mentioned this before. Can't recommend this book highly enough. I find it fascinating. I went through this. It's called Drawing on the Right Side of Your Brain. There's a reason I'm telling you about this. I don't want you necessarily to all become artists, although you may. AI slop notwithstanding, we could use some more artists. So, but here's the thing. I was trying to learn how to draw, and I was frustrated. I never could draw. And one of the artists that I admired the most, a guy named Boris Vallejo, I read an interview with him once. He says the thing that changed his art was he went to this one class because it taught him how to see. I thought that was a remarkable thing for an artist to say. And so I kind of started researching that. This is before internet was really a big thing. You couldn't go on YouTube and find all this stuff. And I ran across this book, Drawing on the Right Side of Your Brain. It fascinated me by its title. So here's the theory of the book. Your brain is divided into 2 hemispheres. And one of your hemispheres, the right side, is what they call the artistic side, but it's more than just that. It's your spatial relations. The right side of your brain is why the very first time you pick up a ball and throw it to somebody, it actually gets to them. Because your brain has done the calculation for how far away they are without you even thinking about it. And you throw a ball and it gets to them. That's the right side of the brain. It does spatial relations. It does colors. It works in the fuzzy world, right? And when you're growing up, it's a very important part of your brain because it's teaching you how to navigate your world. But what happens is, when you go to school, the left side of your brain, which is the calculating side and the categorizing side, starts taking over. Because when you start school, what you need to do very heavily is categorize things. This letter is an A, this letter is a B. It doesn't matter what color it is, how big it is, how small it is, this is always a B. And so it learns how to categorize things. Now, it was working before, too. It'd do things like, that's mommy. No matter what she's wearing, that's mommy. As a young child, you're realizing it. It's categorizing it. And it stores it in your brain so it can pull it out quickly. And it becomes very necessary. But as we, especially in this society, start pushing into school at age 6, what happens is the left brain starts taking over to the detriment of the right brain. And we end up being more left-brained in this society. That impedes your ability to draw because your left side is now in charge of drawing, and it knows what an eye looks like. It's that little tiny thing with a circle in the middle of it. That's it. And we know what a face looks like. Right? It's a little round thing with the 2 eyes, nose, and the mouth, and that's it because it's categorized it, and that's it. So when you look at somebody's face and you try to draw it, what your pencil draws is what your mind remembered from the first time it categorized it, and you end up drawing like a 5-year-old. And if you watch people's drawing, they did the study, and they watch how they progressed, you could see them getting better and better. Like the first time the kid draws a picture of me, and my daughter showed me, this is a nice picture, but Daddy's not as big as a house. Could you maybe make me a little smaller? Because they don't have those kind of spatial relations, but they get it. And you watch them kind of progress in art, and then sometime around, the time they go to school, 2nd, 3rd grade, you'll find it just falls off a cliff. It's just frozen in time, and that's because the left brain has taken over. So this book breaks that down. It gives you a lot of ways to try to draw without thinking about it. Like, turn the picture upside down and draw it. Was one of the exercises, because then it doesn't look like a human anymore. My favorite exercise, the one that blew me away, was they gave us this very complicated picture of this lattice back chair by a table, and all these angles and everything, and it said, draw this. I'm like, I'll never be able to draw that. And it said, don't draw the table, draw the space between the table. So just try to draw the shapes that you see that weren't the chair and weren't the table. And I did that, and I looked at it, oh my gosh, it's there. Then I'll just make a couple connections, and he had it, and started teaching you how to stop categorizing things and draw what you see, right? The reason I'm going through all this is I think there's a spiritual parallel here. Because what happens to us a lot of times is we take these very complex things about God and religion, and we make categories for them. And we just pull them out and use them instead of actually listening to what God is saying. We read through Scripture 100 times and miss stuff because we know what that Scripture says. And I can't tell you how many times people are reading the Bible and they'll say, there's a verse I never knew was there before. I just read this last week, and there it is. We have a tendency to start pulling this stuff out. And that's what's happening when Jesus walks the earth, because the Pharisees knew everything. They had studied it. They defined the law. They knew it. And so therefore, they had certain ideas in place in their head. And when Jesus is standing in front of them, the Son of God himself, the Messiah, the one they've been waiting for their whole lives, is standing in front of them, they don't see him because he doesn't fit what they've categorized God as being. And that's what we're going to see in this story here. So, okay, long thing. And by the way, go out and buy that book if you've ever done it and go through it. You can probably get it on YouTube now and watch it. It's even easier. I'm going to read you the entire chapter of John here, and I'm going to try not to kibitz during it. Kibitz, that's a good Yiddish word. But I'll try not to, and I'll try to save my sermon for the end. Okay. Now, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. When he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with saliva and anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. By the way, one of the weirdest miracles Jesus does, right? This is like, can you imagine? I mean, picture the blind guy. He's sitting there, and Jesus walks up to him. And he's probably heard something about this Jesus guy because he was pretty well known. And he's waiting for him to say something to him. Instead, he hears this. And the next thing he knows, he's having clay rubbed. Can you imagine? Because Jesus hasn't spoken here. He's just doing this. He says, now go wash this off. He's probably thinking, you bet I will, But I want you to do it in the pool of Siloam. Go there and wash it off. And I love this. The guy has no idea why or who he is, but he goes and he washes it. And when he comes back from there, his sight has been restored. So his neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, is this not he who sat and begged? And some said, well, this is he. And others said, well, he looks like him. And he says, no, it's me. I don't know why, guys. I understand I was blind, but it's me. It was me. And they said to him, well, how is it your eyes are opened? How is it your eyes are open? He answered and said, a man called Jesus, so he knew who he was, made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and received sight. And they said to him, well, where is he? And he said, I don't know. I couldn't see him when he was there. Now he's gone. All right. They brought him who was formerly blind to the Pharisees because, of course they do. Now it was a Sabbath when Jesus made clay and opened his eyes because, of course it was. He just seems to always do that, right? Then the Pharisees also asked him, and by the way, he could have healed him on any day of the week he wanted. And that guy was there. He'd been there for years. He picked the Sabbath. Jesus knew what he was doing. So the Pharisees asked him again how he'd receive his sight. So he said to them, well, he put clays on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. And therefore some of the Pharisees says, well, this man's not from God because he doesn't keep the Sabbath. Well, yeah, he doesn't keep the Sabbath. The fact he did a miracle doesn't matter. He didn't keep the Sabbath. Others said, well, how can a man who is a sinner do such things? And there was a division among them. So they said to the blind man, what do you say about him? He opened your eyes. What do you say? He says, well, he's a prophet. A prophet's just basically someone sent by God. He said, he's clearly sent by God. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight. So they think the whole thing's a scam. So they call his parents. And they ask them, saying, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" You can imagine the parents. They don't know anything. They didn't even know he was healed probably by this point. And the parents answered, said, "We know this is our son. We know he was born blind, but by what means he sees now, we do not know. Who opened his eyes? We do not know." This is Sergeant Schultz from Hogan's Heroes. I see nothing. I know nothing, right? And then he says, "He's of age. Ask him. He'll speak for himself." Just go ahead. Get us out of the middle here. Now, his parents said these things because they feared the Jews. When they say Jews, they mean the Sadducees, Pharisees, and the rabbis. They feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that Jesus was Christ, he'd be kicked out of the synagogue. And in those days, that was a big deal. If I kicked you out of Spirit Chapel, you just go up the road to the next church. You know, go, "Oh, they're not good enough for me anyway." You wouldn't care that much. But if you're kicked out of the synagogue, that was it. There was no other place you could go and worship. And the synagogue is where you went and you made your sacrifices, which is how you got your sins forgiven in the Judaism in those days. So it was a big deal to get kicked out of the synagogue. And they didn't want to get kicked. Plus, it's a social hub of the entire Jewish culture. So they don't want to get kicked out of the synagogue. So they basically said, I don't know how this idiot got his eyes opened. I don't know. I don't know. We don't know how he did it. And so that's why they were playing stupid. His parents, he's old enough to speak for himself. Just ask him. So they again called the man who was blind and said, "Give God the glory. We know this man's a sinner. Come on, testify he's a sinner." And he answered and said, "Whether he's a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, that I was blind, and now I see." So they said to him again, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" So they're trying to find out what he did that they could classify as works, right? And he answered them, "I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Oh, that made them mad, right? And they hurled insults at him and said, "You are his disciple. We are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this guy, we do not know where he's from." And the man answered and said, "Why, this is a marvelous thing that you do not know where he's from. And yet he opened my eyes." And then the Pharisees did. "Now, we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. So since the world began, it's been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." Yeah, I don't want to stop moving. Oh, they answered him and said, "You are completely born in sins." Because, he was born blind. So that means he must have, according to Jewish culture, that means either he or his parents sinned. That's why the disciples asked that question. "We know you were born in sins." Isn't it funny how a minute ago they're questioning whether he was really blind, and now they're saying, "Well, we know you were blind, so you're born in sins." So they're accepting the fact that he was blind, and they have to accept the fact that he's now is seeing. But anyway, he says, "Why are you teaching us?" And they cast him out. That isn't just they said, "Leave us." It's leave this synagogue and do not come back. Now, Jesus heard that they'd cast him out, and when he found him, he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" And the man answered, saying, "Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus says, "You have both seen him, and he's the one talking with you. It's me." And then he said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. And Jesus said, "For judgment I've come into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may be made blind." Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said to him, "Oh, are we blind also?" And Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you say, 'We see.' Therefore, your sin remains." Okay, so it's a pretty wild story. It really is. And it goes through a lot of stuff. And I want to go winding back now, and I want to come to the very beginning of it. We're going to do the breakdown of the sermon. I kept up most of the kibitzing out. I'm proud of myself. Okay, let's not do this. So the first thing he said, we go back. He's walking, and what's his disciples say? Well, who's sinned, this man's parents or him? Now that seems like a weird thing, right? It seems very odd that we would ask such a thing. And Jesus actually says, no one, neither parents nor he. This guy is going to be used to show the glory of God. There's no sin involved here. But boy, that's not what they want, right? That's actually not what we want. We have a tendency to want to find somebody or something to blame.
What we need to do now is get focused and stop pointing fingers. You're a problem. You're a real problem.
We love to point fingers, right? And we want to find the problem. There's a reason for that, right? There's a reason why we want to do that. The problem is sometimes bad things happen to good people. That's the reality of life. And I'm going to tell you right here and right now, Christianity does not change that reality. It doesn't. If anybody's told you it does, they're lying to you. And they're deceiving you because they're not preaching the gospel. That's not how it works. But we want it to be that way. See, if suffering is deserved, then it's predictable. And if it's predictable, then it's avoidable. And if it's avoidable, then we feel safe. See, I don't want my baby to be born blind. All I have to do is follow the rules, and the baby won't be born blind. I want that to be true. I don't want to have some kind of a physical ailment happen to me. All I have to do is live a righteous life, and I won't. And that makes me comfortable, right? That's where we are. That's what we want. And so when we see somebody who's standing there and actually telling us that that can't be true, we have to make them the problem. You did this. You brought this on your own head by your sin. Don't tell me about it. You did this. But this man was born blind. How could it be his fault? So that's why I said, well, it must be the parents' fault. That must be it. It must be something the parents did. But Jesus refuses to let his disciples be deceived by this false hope. Righteousness will not keep bad things from happening. It won't. And so we have to understand that. But when Jesus says, look, he was born blind so I can show the glory of God in him, we switch now to the other side. Okay. So that means all suffering is ordained by God. Everything you go through is given to you by God. If you're feeling sick right now, if you're dizzy, if you got back spasms, that's God bringing it to you because he has something he wants to work out in you. I've heard that my whole life, by the way. I was raised as a Calvinist. And everything bad is being used by God to perfect you. And what happened to Job was proof of that, because everything that happened to that man was to perfect his faith. And it's funny how some people need their faith perfected and others don't. But that's the second thing we run to. That's the next thing, right? And Jesus is saying, no, you can't look at it that way. In fact, in the Gospel of Luke, he tells a story that's they come to him and they said, look, Jesus, something happened I want your opinion on. And what happened was some Galileans had been taken by Pilate for sacrilege, and they killed them, and they used their blood and mingled it with the wine that he served his guests. That's gross and that's disgusting. But that's what they did, right? And Jesus says, they said, what do we should say about that? And Jesus doesn't answer their question. He says this, do you think that the reason those Galileans were killed and their blood mingled was because they were worse than all the other Galileans? Is that what you think? Do you think that's why that happened? And then he says, I tell you, no. But he's taking they're trying to take a picture off of that, their mind off that. But unless you repent, you will all perish. He's telling them, look, that isn't what you think it is, but what you need to realize is bad things happen and you could be killed tomorrow. And unless you are with God today, then you're gone. So what you need to stop worrying about is what happened to the Galileans and start worrying about what's going on in your own life. He's trying to pull our attention off of what's happening around us and onto our internal heart, saying this is what needs to matter to you, not what happened to them. And it's hard for us to do. In fact, he goes on there, he says, do you know that tower that fell in Siloam and killed 18 people? Do you think they were killed because they were sinners? Isn't it comforting if that be true? Isn't that comforting? That only happens to sinners. And it's tough, right? Because, look, there's these like school shootings. They're horrible things. And then some kid has a Bible in his backpack that stopped the bullet. And you'll read that and say, well, why was this guy saved? Was he only saved because he was the only Christian there and all of them were killed because they weren't? And if Jesus were there, he'd tell you, I'm telling you, no. That's not how it works. There's no guarantees on that. That's not how this world works. The world is corrupt. It's sinful, it's corrupt, and bad things, therefore, happen to good people. But don't go the other way. Don't say everything bad that happens in your life happens because God wants to perfect something in you. Because that's not what Jesus is saying here. He's saying that the works of God are going to be revealed through him. That's a statement of redemption. See, the problem is, I guess this is a problem. The problem is that God is so good at redemption that when he does it, you think, oh, that must have been the plan all along. But it's just God's that good at redemption. That's the problem. And sometimes I've heard Christians justify their sinful acts saying, well, God just let me do that because he needed to perfect something in my life. You know, I got divorced not once but twice because God wanted me to be here as a preacher, and the only way that was going to happen is if I married her. And she wasn't ready the first time I got married. She was still in the USSR. I couldn't have married her then. So clearly God let me do all these sinful things and go through 2 divorces, all because he was trying to work something in my character. No. I tell you no. If God had wanted me here preaching, he could have done it in 1,000 ways. He didn't need me to sin to do it. So sometimes we actually use our own stuff to justify it. Sinful behavior isn't justifiable for that reason. I'm jumping now way back to Genesis when Joseph's own family sold him into slavery, and God ended up using that to save the entire region, including all the Jews. And Joseph knows that. He says, look, what you guys did, you meant for evil. Let's not pretend you're working for God here. If you're doing evil, if you're doing things for evil, you're not working for God. You're working for the devil. But God used that to keep people alive. He could have gotten Joseph there a million different ways. And yeah, Joseph had things that had to be worked out in his character. But many of these things we call God's plans actually are our own failures. They're just redeemed by his grace. And sometimes bad things happen to good people, and it's not their fault. And that's not God's deciding, yeah, I'm going to work out something in their life with this. I'm going to let this happen. We have to understand we live in a fallen world, and in a fallen world, bad things will happen. God doesn't promise you ever that it won't. What he promises you is he will be with you through it. Okay, that's what. Every miracle God does on earth is temporary. Lazarus is dead today. The blind man he healed no longer sees today, which is why Jesus is always pointing us to the non-temporary. He's always pointing us to what happens in the next life, when every tear will be wiped away, and all this will be gone. And we're going to see the creation the way God meant it. You know, we don't sit on clouds playing harps or even guitars. That's not what the Bible tells us. We go to a new earth that has never known sin, and we live out there for the rest of our lives. That's what we get. We get to see this world the way it was supposed to be. That's what Jesus is saying you need to be focused on, because bad things will happen here. I'll get you through them. Sometimes, miraculously, he heals you. Sometimes, miraculously, he protects you. He's always working your life in many ways. But we have to understand that the purpose of everything he does is to get us ready for what is to come. Number 2, sermon number 2. That's sermon number 1. Done. See? On sermon number 2 here. Your most powerful weapon is your testimony. I hear people all the time saying, I love to witness to people, but I just don't know the Bible as well as you do. So, this blind man didn't know anything about the Bible, apparently. He never quotes it. Except he does know that God doesn't listen to sinners. I guess he knows that. But he doesn't quote Scripture. How would you quote Scripture to the Pharisees? That's a losing act right there. They will outquote you. just like some atheists, you know. They will outquote you. He doesn't bother. He uses his testimony. Whether this man's a sinner, I can't tell you. You know that. Here's what I know. I used to be blind, and now I see. That's a tough thing for the Pharisees to swallow because there's no argument about that. The thing that's really fascinating about him as he does this, if you watch it, there's a progression to his testimony. It starts out rather long. He tells them everything. The neighbors, he tells them everything there is. And then it kind of slowly gets shorter and watch this. So he answers to the first thing. He says, a man called Jesus made clay, anointed my eyes, and said to me, go wash in the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, received my sight. He's telling the whole story. You got every detail there. The next time he tells the story, he says, well, he put clay on my eyes, I washed and I see. See how it got reduced a little bit there? And then when they say, we think you're a sinner, and he's a sinner, he says, here's what I know. I used to be blind, now I see. He boils his testimony down to that part, and that's what drives them nuts, because that's the part they have no answer for. At first they try to say, well, you're not really blind. Then I say, well, you're a sinner because you're blind. Well, which is it? You know I was blind, and now I see. If I was blind because I'm a sinner, what am I now? See, that's a problem with their theology. If only sinners are blind and he's no longer blind, what does that tell us? They can't go there. They don't know what to do with it. So they kick him out of the sanctuary. That's what you do. I can't answer you. Get out of here. I don't want to talk to you anymore. Because that testimony is just too powerful. That's the problem. There's an expression, I don't know who said this. I tried to find, no, I couldn't find the quote. A man with a theology always has to give way to a man with a testimony. I don't care what your systematic theology is. If your testimony is, I once was blind, but now I see, there's nothing they can do with that. Nothing. And I don't care if you're an atheist, an agnostic. I don't care if you got a PhD in science. I don't care if you got a PhD in theology. Buddhist, Muslim, doesn't matter. If your testimony is, it used to be this way, then I met Jesus and now I'm this way. That's the whole thing. I used to be like this, then I met Jesus, and now I'm like that. That actually comes up perfectly in the first season of The Chosen. Mary Magdalene says that. All I know is I used to be like this, now I'm like this, and the only thing that changed between then and now is this man named Jesus. That's the testimony. If you have that testimony, be strong in your faith. Witness boldly, because that testimony needs to be heard. We don't need more people being argued into the faith. We can't do that anyway. The only person I am aware of in the history of society who got argued into the faith was C.S. Lewis. But J.R.R. Tolkien did that, so, that's a different level of intellect, I guess. Don't bother. Don't waste your time on Facebook. Don't waste your time on any of these other places. You're not going to do it. You can't argue something in the kingdom of heaven, but you can tell a testimony. The Pharisees can't argue with it, so they escalate it instead. See, this is what happens. We see this progression in the blind man's life. We see that progression. I kind of skipped over that. Let me go back there and hit those notes again. He starts and he keeps moving forward, but he goes from total blindness, physical and spiritual, to the truest sight in the story. Not only does he have perfect eyes, he has a perfect heart because he sees Jesus for who he is. When Jesus comes and says, do you believe in the Son of God, Son of Man? Basically, do you believe in the Christ? He said, I don't know. Who is he? He says, well, I am. He said, well, if it's you, yes, I believe. Right? Because he knows. He knows there's no way that what happened. When a person's not born with sight, it clearly is indicating in this story that he didn't have eyeballs, or the ones he had just didn't work. Because they're talking about it. Because that's what he says is, in the history of mankind, that's never been healed before. It's not just I have my sight and it's fuzzy. That could be a lot of things. This was, I didn't have eyeballs and now I do. In the history of the world, that's never happened. So I'm not going to argue now. Okay. Where am I now? Okay, back to here. The Pharisees can't deal with it. The Pharisees are deceived. You know, they're like that artist who keeps drawing the eyeball the same way, even though that's not what it really looks like. They're deceived. They want the Messiah to act a certain way, and they want their Messiah, weirdly, to follow their rules. And Jesus says, yeah, I didn't come here to follow your rules. And so they can't see him. They're deceived. I don't know if you've ever talked to deceived people. You can't reason with them. Because what's happened is the lie they've told themselves becomes the truth they tell to you. They believe what they tell you. A liar, you can show them the truth. They go, okay, you got me. They might not be so good about it. But when you catch a liar in a lie, and they know it's a lie, they go, yeah, you're right. But someone who's deceived, they believe the lie. If you tell them that's a lie and they have to believe that, their whole world falls apart. And people will defend that to the death. So, when you're talking to somebody who's getting deceived and you give them something like this, well, I used to be blind, but now I see, what are you going to do about that? They will get angry with you because they can't possibly rethink their theology. So, that's what happens. My question is, what is your true testimony? Now, of course, none of us here were blind and now we're seeing. But did you have one of these moments like Mary Magdalene discusses? I used to be like this, and now I'm like that, and the only thing that happened between those two things was Jesus? Do you have that testimony? Because if you do, you don't need a seminary degree. You can go witness. You're good. But if you don't, why not? Because the whole point of Jesus coming in your life is to change you. If there's no change, then you don't have a testimony. If you don't have a testimony, why not? I would say it's because you have not fully committed to the Christian life. Okay, so the Pharisees, they go the other way. They go from, oh, okay, I'm going to come back to that. Come here. Okay, here we go. The Pharisees' journey. The Pharisees go the other way. They begin with physical sight and religious knowledge. They've got them both. And as this happens and this miracle takes place in them, they reject the evidence. At first they try to say he wasn't really blind. Then when he was blind, he said, well, okay, but it must have been the devil that did it. Even though their own theology says that's not possible. And so they move from a standpoint of let's find out what's going on to we found out what goes on and it challenges our belief. Therefore, we must cast this out. Let's throw the guy who actually experienced a miracle of God out of the congregation. Let me tell you something. If one of you experienced a miracle on that level, I don't want you ever leaving Spirit Chapel. I want to introduce everybody to you, right? So you can tell them the story. They don't want the story because it counteracts what they're doing. They are choosing to remain blind spiritually. And that's what Jesus comes and tells them in the end. Says, if you were really blind, you'd be okay. But you're saying, I see. And if you see, you should see me. That's what he's saying. Okay. So, here's what's interesting to me. When they cast him out, the Bible says Jesus went looking for him. Isn't that a great little detail? He got kicked out of the one place that he thought he had to go for all spiritual everything. And the Son of God himself found him on the street because he heard. They cast him out. And Jesus went to find him. Let me tell you something. Jesus will come to find you too. Don't worry about what happens to you if you get cast out because of your testimony. Jesus will find you. He's going to come. Don't worry about that at all. Okay, so I'm going to let that go and get back to this. One thing that's kind of interesting in this story that I thought I had a slide for, but I don't. So I'll tell you. Jesus spits into clay and picks it up and uses it in the man's eye. Do you realize the last time the Creator's hands touched clay, he created Adam? Isn't that a cool little detail? The last time we saw Jesus, because in the Bible, in the beginning, God creates the heaven and earth, and you see him create everything kind of by pointing at it. Let there be light. Let there be animals. Let there be this. But on the sixth day, everything changes. And God says, let us create man. Let us. And it gets personal. And it says he scooped up the clay from the ground and made the body, and he breathed his breath into it. So the body was, and then the spirit, and he became a living soul. That's what the Bible tells us. You won't see God's hand touch clay again until here in John. I think Jesus made an eyeball, stuck it right in there. He creates, right? That's what he does. Isn't it wild? So he does that, and he heals this man. And you'll see in the Bible, we've talked about this in weeks past, where he's gentle with the woman at the well. She doesn't understand, so he's gentle. He shows her some things, but he's gentle with her. He's gentle with the paraplegic who gets brought down to him and the people around him. They don't understand, so he's gentle with them. But the Pharisees, he's not gentle. Why? Because they know better. You've had the whole Bible. You have had the blessed life where you could do nothing but study scriptures all day long. And you're missing me? This miracle I just did for your benefit on a Sabbath, so I knew you'd pay attention, right? Because if you've done it on Monday, no one cares. It does it on a Sabbath, it becomes national news. And it did this in order to wake you up, and you choose to stay asleep instead. That's a choice they're making. Deceived people eventually have to make that choice. Let go of the deception, or just say, no, I'm going to let go of the truth. And say, let go of the truth instead. To whom much is given, much is expected. The most dangerous blindness is the kind from not knowing it exists. See, if you're walking around in blindness, you know, and therefore you take precautions. But have you ever had, I guess maybe get old like me, a moment when you black out? That's dangerous because you don't know where you are anymore. Bad things can happen to you in that moment when you black out. And you get up too fast, you're dizzy. A lot of you look at it, oh, Pastor Mark, I didn't know you blacked out. It isn't like that. But if I get up too fast, sometimes I'm bending over looking at something and then I get up like, whoa, you get that woozy feeling for a second, and you don't know where you are. That's the dangerous blindness. Because I can't know what I'm in now. That's the most dangerous there is. And the man who couldn't see ends up seeing everything. The man who could see ends up seeing nothing that matters. But this is prophesied. Isaiah told us way back when, having eyes they will not see, having ears they will not hear. Jesus comes to do that. And that's what this story's all about. It's about two choices to the miracle. By the way, some of the Jews believed. They saw the man get healed. It wasn't just he who believed. Some other Jews believed as well. They said, Jesus has to be from God. Has to be. And if the Pharisees keep telling us that he isn't, then the Pharisees must be wrong. Right? This is happening as this goes on. This isn't just one soul Jesus is saving through this. He's saving many. Because this is the choice we have, folks. When God moves in our lives, either we're going to see it or we're not. And there are some people who just won't see Jesus when he's standing in front of them. It's frustrating sometimes. I see what Jesus has done in some people's lives. I'm like, don't you see it? Don't you see it? So, homework. Is God redeeming something in your life that you're just busy being bitter about because you're accusing him of causing it? Is there something that he's trying to work with you to redeem, but we just can't get there because we're too bitter because we believe he caused it? I let a guy preach here. I don't do it often, but a guy preached here once. And I'm sitting in the front row, and he said, and then God gave me a heart attack. I almost jumped up and grabbed the microphone. I was like, oh, don't listen to him. God didn't give him a heart attack. Years of bad eating had given him a heart attack. Don't blame that on God. But people just believe that stuff. Just because God saved you in the emergency room doesn't mean he gave it to you to begin with. And secondly, what's your one true sentence? Can you reduce your testimony to one line? Maybe you can't. Maybe you got such a testimony, it's more than one line. That's okay. But do you have something that the people who knew you before you were saved and the people who know you now can say, yeah, they're different. That's different. Sometimes you don't see it right away. Victoria's getting better every day with her foot. At the beginning, it was easy. She stopped scooting around that little scooter of hers, and I could see, whoa, things are getting better, Then she got out of the boot. Oh, I can see it. Things are getting better. It's harder to see it now, right? So sometimes we don't understand that God's still working in her and still healing her. She still feels pain, and she starts wondering when that's going to go away. But you see, God's changing you. She said just today, she said, it just occurred to me, I'm wearing flip-flops. I didn't used to be able to wear flip-flops. See, God's still working in our lives. Sometimes we don't see it. So maybe sometimes we need to go ask God, say, hey, where is my testimony? I know I have one. Show me. Show me what you've already done in my life. Because he's already worked in your life. He's already done some things. And learn to express that to people. Well, here's what I know. I was like this. Now I'm like that. And the only thing between there was Jesus. You need that testimony. If you don't have it, ask God why not. Because that's going to tell you, are you like the blind man moving toward the light? Or are you like the Pharisees moving away from the light?